We started this symposium in the year 2001 to help provide an academic dimension to the commemoration of San Jacinto Day. And we felt that we needed to do this because we wanted to bring together some outstanding scholars from around the state and country to help educate the people of Houston and Texas on the Battle of San Jacinto and some of the great events that happened just before and after the battle, so that people can understand better the events of the Texas Revolution, which really is our creation story of Texas and is the foundation for what it really means to be a Texan today. It's so important for us in our current generation to help preserve this story and to help interpret it with different perspectives so that it becomes relevant and stays alive and interesting during our 21st century. So that's why we do this. One of the most remarkable things about our symposium is that it is done entirely by volunteers. We have a San Jacinto Symposium committee which does everything from reserving this room to coordinating the lunch, to coordinating the programs, the mailers that you receive, and all of the different logistics with getting the speakers here and so forth. The members of the committee are listed in your program, but I would like to recognize Barbara Eves and Dave Britton, the co-chairs of the committee this year, for their outstanding work in making this possible. We have absolutely nobody is a paid staff person that puts on this program, so it's really remarkable that we're able to do this year in and year out on this basis. I'd also like, many of the members of the committee are outside at the registration desk, but if you see them here, be sure to thank them because of their outstanding work. I'd also like to mention our sponsors, in particular the Summerlee Foundation in Dallas. We have here John Crane is here today. The Summerlee Foundation has done a tremendous amount of work and made great contributions to Texas history during its existence. They've shown great support for this event, and we really couldn't do it without their support, and we really appreciate everything that the Summerlee has done. Also this year, we have a new partner, Sterling Bank. They've produced this very fine reproduction of Sam Houston's report of the Battle of San Jacinto. There's enough copies for everybody out in the back. Anyway, this is from Sterling Bank. Be sure to pick up a copy. This is an original copy of Sam Houston's report of the Battle of San Jacinto, which is in the Dallas Historical Society. They have an original copy, and Sterling Bank has reproduced this for us today. Also, I'd like to mention in your packet there is an application and a flyer for the Texas State Historical Association. And if you like this program or this type of program, you're going to love being a member of the Texas State Historical Association, because they do this on a much broader scale with a very fine annual meeting each year. We have here today Larry McNeil, who's the current president. We also have several former presidents, including two of our speakers are former presidents. It's a fine organization, and I encourage everyone to join if you haven't already joined. We also, today, for the first time during the history of our symposium, we have certification from the State Board of Education for teachers, and we have a number of teachers in the audience here today for the first time. We really appreciate you coming, and this is part of our outreach to help educate not only you, but hopefully you'll come away with some different perspectives on teaching our children today about Texas history, and a great appreciation for it. I mentioned the teachers that are here today, and again, I want to thank you for coming. Also, I mentioned before about the Friends of San Jacinto Battleground. This is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We're performing very important work in helping to preserve the battleground at San Jacinto, and we have information about joining that organization too. It's in the foyer. We have here today Jan DeVauld, who's president of the Friends, and she'll be speaking at lunch and telling you a little bit more about the organization. We also have a Houston Media Source here. They'll be videotaping this event. The prior symposiums have also been videotaped, and they're available on DVD in case you're interested. In addition, in your packets, there is an evaluation form. Looks like this. Think about this evaluation form as you go through the program today. Our responses are very important to help fine-tune and improve the program in future years. Also, for parking, I need to make an announcement that you need to get a parking token before you leave, and the tokens will be at the desk out front as you leave. Finally, I just want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to come here. I think we've got a great program lined up, some really great speakers. And with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. James E. Crisp. He's professor of history at North Carolina State University. He's making an encore appearance here. He's been here for several years, and we're really happy to have him back. Dr. Crisp has made quite a name for himself in Texas history. His recent book, Sleuthing the Alamo, won the T.R. Fehrenbach Book Award yesterday in Galveston from the Texas Historical Commission. Very prestigious award. We're very glad to have him back. He's going to introduce our speakers today and give us an overview of some of the issues that we're going to be discussing. Again, thank you very much for coming and patronizing our 6th annual Battle of San Jacinto Symposium. Jim?
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me okay? It really is an honor to be asked to come back here year after year after year. I sort of have made the statement to my folks back home that if you schedule anything in April, I'm not going to be around. I'm going to be back in Houston, and it's really nice to be able to do this every year. I used to come research Texas history in July and August, and believe me, March and April are better. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time giving you the educational background and bibliographies of our speakers, mainly because it would take up a great deal of the time that we have allotted to us. The 3 speakers that you're going to hear this morning, Don Felix, Felix Amaraz from UT San Antonio, John Jordan, counselor from Atlanta, and Jerry Drake from the General Land Office are each going to give us very different perspectives on what's going on in the Texas Revolution. Dr. Amaraz did his initial educational work at St. Mary's and got his PhD from University of New Mexico. John Jordan is a graduate of Samford University in Alabama and Vanderbilt Law School. Jerry stayed home in Texas and did his work at 2 of my favorite places because they've been so good to me in the past, and that's the University of North Texas, and something that I have to make my mind really focused to say, and that's Texas State University at San Marcos. I'm still not quite used to that term. But what really interests me about what we're going to hear today is what they're going to say about the collision of different traditions, the collision of different worlds, of different ways of thinking that take place during the Revolution. And I'm not just talking about the military collision, but the collision of different political traditions, the collision of different ways of thinking about not only civic and political activity, but also how you fight a war. This afternoon we'll be introduced to Andres Reséndez and Archie McDonald, and I know in Andres's book about changing national identities on the frontier, one of the most interesting things that he talks about are the different discourses. And if I could just jump ahead for a moment and have you think about his book, he talks about something that we're not going to talk about this weekend called the Texian Santa Fe expedition, and he looks at it from the perspective of the Anglos and the Anglo-Americans and the Anglo-Texans and how they talk about it and what discourse takes place about that. And then he looks at it from the perspective of Mexico, very different, where every caudillo has a newspaper. And the newspapers and the military are all talking about this almost as if they're from a parallel universe. And then in one of his most brilliant moves, he goes up and talks about the Kiowa, and he takes a cowhide, one of these winter counts from the Kiowa Apaches, and shows that they ran into the Texan Santa Fe expedition too. and that they saw it from their world. Well, what Dr. Amaraz is going to do is to talk about Santa Anna's pamphleteering background and the way he thought about pulling together political and military forces through the grand gesture, the political pamphlet. It's related to the tradition of the grito, the shout, or the plan, the plan. It is a tradition which feeds directly into Mexican mobilization for putting down the Texas Revolution. It's a tradition that has to affect Santa Anna's thinking as he goes into that war, and perhaps we can think about what grand gesture did he have in mind, politically as well as militarily, as he thought about what he was going to do in that war. John Jordan is going to talk about a collision of traditions to a certain extent, the way he does in his book, The Lone Star Navy. One of my favorite chapters and a real eye-opener is his chapter called General at the Helm. What happens when you put a general in charge of the Navy, specifically Sam Houston? A general who doesn't understand how navies work, how navies are put together, how navies have to be provisioned, how navies have to be kept intact, because unlike the militia tradition, you can't just pull these people together all of a sudden and send them out in the field. You've got to have them ready. And there's a collision of ways of thinking there. And that we may see even some harbingers of that in his talk about what's going on in the Texas Revolution. We were discussing a book, the author of which will remain unmentioned today at breakfast, a famous book about the Texas Revolution that doesn't talk about the Navy at all, and doesn't talk about the Mexican retreat and the decision to retreat, which is bound up with whether or not the Gulf will be under the control of the rebels or of the Mexican government. It's central to the outcome of the Texas Revolution. And these are different worlds. Some universities even have a military history department and a naval history department. There's a little inter-service rivalry from time to time that comes out in something like this, and it means that one doesn't quite understand what the other's doing and how it works. And John is going to inform us about some of the dynamics that are going on in the Texas Revolution as two different ways of fighting intersect and interact and maybe collide themselves. And then Jerry Drake is going to do that nitty-gritty of getting down. Sometimes there's a collision of worlds of historical thinking. You know, how do we tell the story of the Texas Revolution? Do we tell it in broad strokes, simplistic strokes of good and evil, of simple, okay, Houston retreated, Santa Anna went after him, then Houston jumped on him and surprised him? You know, it's a great story, but when you start breaking it apart into its small pieces, you begin to get into that detail that resists final and definite analysis. What really happened, as the great historian Robin Collingwood of Oxford University said, that everyone who really gets into the history knows that nothing is really settled, that there are questions at the edges of almost every major issue that have to be investigated and argued and re-argued. What I tell my students at North Carolina State when they want to be historians is two things to remember. One is that every ball that gets thrown at you in history is a curveball. It's got aspects that you really don't quite expect, and every historical question has to be taken fresh without us expecting to know what the answer is. And the other is that there aren't any answers in the back of the book. In other words, we can't go to the library and find out which of us is really right. All of us make an attempt to fit our narrative to the evidence. And we have to compare our narratives and see which ones best fit the evidence. We can't go back and say, okay, let's look at the real history and compare our narrative to that, because we don't have it. There is no such thing as studying the past. The past is gone. We can't touch it. What we have to do is study the fragmentary remains of that past as they exist in the present. And what Jerry Drake is going to do is to talk about the nitty-gritty of getting his hands dirty, something that Greg Dimick has talked about to us in the past. The nitty-gritty of getting his hands dirty and see if he can pull some of that past up out of the muck and compare it to what we thought happened, and maybe inch us a little further towards an understanding of the realities of the Texas Revolution. So I'm going to quit talking now and let you hear about these collisions of worlds, of historical thinking, of military thinking, of political thinking, in exactly the reverse order to what I just gave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crisp. Can you hear me way back there in the Hallelujah Choir? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased and I'm honored to be here at your symposium for the San Jacinto. We said that's the way we pronounced it in San Antonio, but I guess I'm over here, I'm a politician, so I'll have to say San Jacinto. And I must remember that when I play Sam Houston. I am personally honored to have here a former student of mine, Albert Rakus, and I always knew him as Albert Victor, but over here he has become just Albert Rakus. And the Consul General of Spain, my friend Julio Montesino, who heard about this conference, and then from back home, County Commissioner Tommy Atkinson. We have 4 county commissioners and a county judge. 3 of them are historically literate, and but Tommy is the best. So thank you for coming, Tommy. The inspiration, that is the idea for this presentation on Before Texas, Genesis of Santa Ana as a pamphleteer, came from copies of pamphlets that are located in the Sutro Library in San Francisco. A friend of mine, Texan, Dr. W. Michael Mathis, is the curator of the Colección Mexicana at the Sutro Library. And I was preparing to give a paper in San Antonio on Santa Ana and his generals. And he said, I have a lot of material over here at Sutro. I'll just duplicate some and send them to you. So a lot of them were pamphlets. And it caused me to rethink about the pamphleteering tradition. I had always believed from American history, my study, that, well, it began in North America with Samuel Adams and how they used pamphlets in order to keep the momentum going. But I didn't realize that it was much more extensive, and there were some antecedents to this. Pamphleteering evolved as an inexpensive medium of literary expression or advertising. The chapbooks in English society began as pamphlets or small booklets of popular ballads or tales, formerly peddled aloud or hawked by sales promoters who became known as old chaps. And they sold then their chapbooks from door to door. In the late 17th century and early 18th century, immigrant typesetters and peddlers conveyed the printed medium to British North America. In the second half of the 18th century, when relations between Parliament and the daughter colonies deteriorated into armed rebellion, pamphleteers typified by Samuel Adams compiled, printed, and disseminated information concerning the latest developments in the battlefield. Adams and his partisans maintained a relentless distribution of pamphlets via a network of local and county committees of correspondence and exchanges with intercolonial revolutionary camps. It was said that there were 2 factors of significance that aided the pamphleteers in their mission during the short span of the American Revolution, and one was the absence of mountainous barriers, and the other was the impressive degree of literacy among the readership. And for many years, that was taken as a fact of life, that this was true for the American Revolution, but it wasn't true for another revolution that occurred later in Mexico. Yes, there were the mountainous barriers, but the pamphleteers were working. They just didn't allow the barrier. It took a little longer, but then even the mail service today takes a little longer to get messages, you know, from within a city. But I'm a traditionalist. I believe in the postage stamps. I believe in keeping them busy. And I know my friend Jim Crisp over here gets a little annoyed with me because I don't use the email. But I do use the telephone. And so I like the direct communication. Well, Spain's history was influenced by waves of immigration and occupation, and the literary tradition developed there in centers of urban density. And notwithstanding the ominous shadow of the Inquisition, the literary splendor attained its zenith during the celebrated golden century of Spain, which really was only 90 years, but it's best to say a century, 1490 to 1680. And while we're dealing with centuries, I can see there are quite a number of converts in this audience. When I reached 50 years, I didn't send out an invitation to say, come to my 50th birthday. I invited them to come and help me celebrate my half centennial. That was impressive. And now, and there are those who say, well, I'm only 25, it's quarter century. Don't deal in years, think in terms of the event and celebrate the event and forget the years. Well, in history, we can't ignore the years. We have to, that's our bread and butter. When the movable type became operational between the 1455 and the year 1539, a gap of 47 years after Columbus's encounter with the Americas, the Bishop of Mexico, Juan de Zumárraga, introduced the first printing press in Mexico City. And the prelate's achievement antedated Boston's initial printed works by 100 years. Before long, there were a number of printing presses in Mexico. In the first century, you had only 4 presses. And then by 1761, there were 6 printing presses alone for Mexico City. And I can make some other comparisons, but in the essence of time, I'll skip a lot of the data. In Spain, there was a printing, not a printing firm, but a book firm, Jacobo and Juan Kronberger, father and son. And they managed a very lucrative monopoly in the book trade in 16th century Sevilla. Their firm annually shipped multiple crates of books to colonial Mexico, some at the request of Bishop Zumárraga. The Kronbergers planted the seeds of a literary tradition in Spanish North America. However, the social phenomenon that fomented the antecedents of pamphleteering occurred in the last quarter of the 18th century with the proliferation of cartas, or postal communications. Cartas gained popularity among the reading public as the Spanish equivalent of chapbooks, but their coverage exceeded the peddler's hawking. In 20th century journalistic parlance, cartas were special editions or extras that summarized reports of major events received from distant lands. Andrés de Alarcón Mendoza published the first carta in Madrid. The special editions that ran from 1621 to 1626 included snippets of news about the royal court, fashions, galas, brief accounts of droughts, earthquakes, famine, and deaths of ranking dignitaries transmitted by correspondence in the far-flung outposts of the Spanish Empire. The fledgling habit of the cartas gradually extended to Spanish America, where enterprising printers republished verbatim reports initially featured in the stylized Gaceta de Madrid. Before the end of the century, printers in colonial Mexico and elsewhere dropped cartas from the masthead and introduced relaciones or descripciones. In the second half of the 18th century, another medium of information evolved in Spain and colonial Mexico, Sociedades Económicas de Amigos del País. And they soon dropped the económicas, the descriptive phrase there, just became Sociedades de los Amigos del País, which would signify that they were operating within the law, that they were operating with the sanction of the crown. And these sociedades were unique in Spanish-American society because both men and women assembled to read and discuss the latest books and pamphlets of mutual interest. The devotees gathered in candle-lit veladas. A vela is a candle, so they had candles, and they called them veladas or tertulias. The latter term, tertulias, derived from the name of an Latin ecclesiastical writer, Quintus Septimus Florens Tertullianus of Carthage. At the tertulias, the guests discussed literary and scientific topics. The nomenclature of the assembly, Society of Friends of the Country, reflected loyalty to the government. It was the government that had given them, that had sanctioned these meetings. It had sanctioned the printed media from which then they took ideas for discussion. At least 2 decades before the culmination of Mexican independence, printing presses, pamphlets, and tertulias were commonplace in provincial capitals located in the central corridor of New Spain. And there you have then the geography. On the left, you have then the Sierra Madre of the west. On the east, the Sierra Madre of the east. And then these mountain ranges were served as barriers, but the couriers found ways to either get through those barriers or go around them. In the first decade of the 19th century, Napoleonic armies invaded Iberia, paralyzed the government, and in the crisis, the Spanish Cortes that claimed legitimacy in the name of the absent monarch extended freedom of the press to loyalists in colonial Mexico, a concession that ultra-conservatives vehemently opposed. Meanwhile, the various chapters of the abbreviated Sociedades de Amigos del País continued the traditional and literary tertulias. At the start of the second decade, however, with Spain still in the grip of the Napoleonic invaders, secret cells called Los Guadalupes plotted to overthrow the royalist authority. Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, rural pastor of Dolores, joined the literary and social club in nearby Querétaro to plan the insurgency against the Spanish crown. Hidalgo failed to achieve the goals of the insurrection and ultimately paid the supreme penalty for inciting a rebellion. However, even as the fortunes of his revolt plummeted, he used a printing press to attract the support of new partisans. A successor insurgent, also a priest, José María Morelos, retrieved Hidalgo's fallen mantle of leadership. As one of his strategies, he accepted the support of Los Guadalupes, who contributed a printer and a printing press to the cause. On the threshold of independence, Agustín de Iturbide, a staunch royalist, who from the comfort of involuntary retirement discerned the moral rectitude of the insurgency. Late in 1820, he resolved to switch allegiances. At a summit in the remote sanctuary of Iguala, Iturbide consulted with rebel chieftain Vicente Guerrero. The two leaders drafted and endorsed a plan of Iguala, the concepts of which Iturbide reduced to 3 compact guarantees: independence, religion, and equality. Subsequently, Iturbide appropriated a printing press to reproduce multiple editions of the proclamation to recruit new adherents. Unlike initial rebellious leaders who haphazardly distributed printed pamphlets, Iturbide carefully selected towns that encircled Mexico City, then dispatched couriers with bundles of the plan of Iguala to those locations and waited for the propaganda to soften the objectives within municipal limits. Unlike Miguel Hidalgo, who a decade earlier at Monte de las Cruces had attempted to seize control of the entrance at Monte de las Cruces, attempted to get an entrance into Mexico City by force of arms. On September 27, 1821, Agustin de Iturbide and his generals rode triumphantly as liberators into, quote, this most noble city. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna of the coastal region of Veracruz became an early supporter of Agustin de Iturbide. Admittedly, Santa Anna shrewdly negotiated 2 promotions in short order. As a royalist captain, he courageously fought bandits and rebels in the rural countryside. On March 23, 1821, he pursued a band of insurgents into the town of Orizaba. And from their defensive bastion, the rebels boldly invited him to join their ranks. And Santa Anna responded with a heavy barrage from within the fortified convento that he had commandeered. In the pre-dawn hours of March 29th, Santa Anna led a royalist contingent in a surprise attack upon the rebel partisans, capturing horses, munitions, and supplies. Then they returned to their convento stronghold. They retreated into this convento. And during the daylight hours, the rebels highly reinforced and advanced upon the convento, but they did not storm then the religious community. In the early afternoon, serious negotiations began. In his coat pocket, Santa Anna held a bargaining memorandum, namely a royalist promotion to the grade of lieutenant colonel, awarded by General Jose Davila for winning victories against rebel forces. At 2 o'clock, the rebel commander, Jose Joaquin de Herrera, bestowed upon Santa Anna the rank of full colonel as a reward for switching allegiance. For the next 7 months, Santa Anna routinely patrolled the coastal slope as military commander of Veracruz. But he wasn't allowed to command the port city. By October 18th, Royalist General Davila, who had taken refuge in the island fortress of San Juan de Ulloa, surrendered. By that date, the insurgents in Veracruz province knew for certain that Agustin de Iturbide had entered Mexico City in splendor. By January 1822, Santa Anna returned to his hacienda as military commandant of all of the province of Veracruz. Meanwhile, in less than a year, Iturbide's partisans had manipulated events that resulted in his designation as Agustin I, Emperor of Mexico. A regency, an important brace of empire, functioned as an administrative apparatus. In May 1822, the regency summoned Santa Anna to Mexico City to clasp on his epaulettes the coveted insignia of Brigadier General. The star that fell upon Santa Anna's epaulette designated him as the youngest officer of general denomination. I was most appreciative to the organizing committee who gave us a tag yesterday with a star. And I like, they put the star for my tag here at the bottom. And I was glad, I didn't tell him that, but I'm glad that they did it, because I understand there was some propaganda, maybe a pamphlet that was distributed and said that about this conference that there would be 2 grand old men and 3 rising stars in Texas history. And I got a phone call, said, which one are you? I said, I'm a rising star. You see, I still have to reach that height. I'm working. So I like that, because the star is then at the base, not at the top. Well, the stars fell on Santa Anna, and he never was the same again. I once at a conference one time, and it was a Methodist bishop, one of the speakers, and his wife was in the audience. And then during luncheon, I said to her, Madam, there is an axiom that bishops, generals, and deans are not ordinary mortals. And she said, what did you say, my dear? I said, bishops, generals and deans are not ordinary mortals. City, you're quite right. So I talk to colonels. I talk to colonels very comfortably. With generals, I have to say, sir, general, you look like you were a general. You were. Oh, you should have been a general. Well, what happened then very quickly in Mexican history, Santa Anna never allowed political philosophies to cloud his thinking. He was an observer. He was, some have said, an opportunist. He allowed those delegates who went to after Iturbide fell, went to a constituent Congress in Mexico City to hammer out a constitution. It came out as a Federalist Constitution of 1824. When he was pressed to give a response to what he favored, he said that he favored constitutional principles. And they didn't know what he meant by that. So they construed that to mean he was in favor of a federal republic. But he stayed on the periphery. He did not get involved in the arena of debate. So in 1824, with a constitution now hammered out, then candidates then competed for the presidency, and an insurgent general by the name of Felix Fernandez entered the presidential sweepstakes with a new name, Guadalupe Victoria. I guess with the name Felix Fernandez, he never would have won. But Guadalupe Victoria, then he won, and he achieved the distinction as the only chief executive to serve the full 4-year term. And during the interval, Santa Anna had remained apolitical but politically motivated. And then 2 foreign diplomats introduced Masonic lodges as partisan clubs. The British minister, Henry George Ward, formed the Scottish Rite Lodge called Los Escoceses for the Centralists. And then the American minister, Joe Roberts Poinsett, founded the York Rite Lodge or Los Yorquinos for the Federalists. In Veracruz, Santa Anna leaned heavily, favorably toward the Yorquinos, but his family interest then pulled him back toward the Escocese side. But he preferred to be ambivalent. And in the presidential campaign of 1828, 2 Yorquinos then competed. Although he was a centralist, but he was a Yorquino, Manuel Gomez Pedraza, who was the incumbent Minister of War and Navy, and the Federalist Vicente Guerrero. And Santa Anna endorsed the later candidate, but he was still in Veracruz province. Mainly because he endorsed Guerrero because the other candidate had offended him, Minister of Army and War and Navy. The minister offended Santa Anna by not recognizing his exalted rank as Commandant of Veracruz. The generals are not ordinary mortals. They have to be honored. Well, Pedraza, as the interim office holder, manipulated the army to influence the voting of the state legislatures in favor of his candidacy. And there were 21 states. There were 4 territories. Only the state legislatures then could cast votes. It would be like the Electoral College. And so there would be 1 vote per state. And the army then influenced just 11 legislatures. That's all you needed to do. You forget the other 10. So 11 votes gave the presidency to Gomez Pedraza. Infuriated by the fraud, the Federalist supporters of the losing candidate tore the fabric of the Constitution by resorting to armed revolt to evict Gomez Pedraza from Mexico. And parenthetically, I might say that the American minister soon became persona non grata because then he came out and he was flying then the American flag, encouraging then the Federalists to the supporters of Vicente Guerrero to achieve their victory. That only That relationship only lasted 1 year. After Guerrero was gone, then so was Joel Roberts Poinsett. But he did contribute something to American folklore. He was a botanist, and he appreciated the beautiful Noche Buena. And he took some cuttings and then brought him back. You remind me of Madame Lafarge. I keep feeling the guillotine is going to fall on me. He brought back the cuttings, which then he cultivated in his greenhouse at home in Charleston, and soon he entered them in a botanical contest, gave him a scientific name, the Poinsettia pulchirima. And in the December, then you see the nurseries promoting the poinsettias. But nowhere do they have a picture of Joel Roberts Poinsett as being the one. You know, we educators, we school teachers need to do this. Go out there and distribute pictures of Poinsett to all these nurseries in our communities and say, this is part of international relations here and goodwill. By the end of 1829, the Centralists used the same tactic that the Federalists had used in 1828, and the Centralists then rebelled against Vicente Guerrero and assassinated him. And then in 1830, the vice president, who was a Centralist, General Anastasio Bustamante, then took to wearing the presidential sash. By 1829, Santa Anna's demeanor gradually changed. At first, he was satisfied that his friend Vicente Guerrero had become president. But he disagreed, he disapproved strongly of the tactical decision to allow then the centralist Anastasio Bustamante to become vice president. And Anastasio Bustamante had been the running mate of the ousted Gomez Pedraza, who went to live in Europe. And apart from launching a pronunciamiento in support of Guerrero, Santa Anna remained over in his province of what now is called a state in Veracruz. And 4 years later, his critics excoriated him for not defending Gomez Pedraza as the legitimately elected president of Mexico. They didn't say anything about him in 1828. They didn't write pamphlets chastising him. No, they waited 4 years, and then they chastised him. Well, during that 1 year that Vicente Guerrero was president, a Spanish flotilla sailed from Cuba and staged an amphibious landing near the port of Tampico on July 16, 1829. And news of this daring invasion reached down to Veracruz and motivated Santa Anna to act with dispatch. He didn't wait for Mexico City then to send him orders and tell him what to do. He decided what to do. He commandeered all the foreign ships in the harbor of Veracruz. He compelled the Porteño merchants to contribute a loan of 20,000 pesos, and he ordered the improvised armada to transport the infantry to the battle site. Then he led the cavalry up the coast to Tampico. And although greatly outnumbered by the invaders, Santa Anna's leadership reflected boldness, imagination, and courage. Tropical storms near the Louisiana coast wrecked one of the Spanish transports. The other ships disembarked the troops on the beach south of Tampico in a pocket of infectious yellow fever. Initially, Santa Anna deployed the tools of diplomacy to persuade the Spaniards to withdraw. Then he applied the accoutrements of force to compel General Isidro Barradas to surrender on September 11, 1829. A victorious Santa Anna extended magnanimity to the vanquished, allowing them to withdraw with dignity and honor. And he provided medical attention to the wounded, allowing them to remain until they had recovered, and then they would find their way to Cuba. The victory at Tampico catapulted Santa Anna into an arena reserved for national heroes. a grateful President Guerrero bestowed a promotion to General of Division, together with a ceremonial belt appropriate to the elevated rank. Subsequently, the Congress accorded to Don Antonio the extraordinary designation of Benemérito de la Patria, meritorious servant of the country. Between the presidential campaign of 1828 and the defeat of the Spanish forces at Tampico in 1829, Santa Anna emerged out of the shadows of ambivalence and into the sunlight of pamphleteering. For months, Santa Anna thrived in the warmth of the prestige and acclaim derived from the congressional tribute as Benemérito de la Patria. And through the tumultuous phase of public disapproval of General Anastasio Bustamante, who in 1829, had usurped presidential authority by virtue of an assassination of Vicente Guerrero, Santa Anna remained aloof from the controversy. The contentious law of April 6, 1830, which we know so well here in Texas, designed to stem the flow of immigration from the United States, split public opinion in East Texas between Bustamantistas and Santanistas. In Veracruz, Santa Anna waited for the uproar against Bustamante to escalate before he committed himself to the opposition. By the summer of 1832, the pronunciamiento in his favor, there were several, propelled Santa Anna to endorse the sanctity of the Federalist Constitution of 1824. He alleged that Bustamante had dishonored this Constitution by usurpation of power. Santa Anna supporters distributed a pamphlet advocating law and order. Why such action, they asked? Because the public demands it. Quote, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, animated by a fiery patriotism and obedient to the impulses of charity, aware of similar sacrifices of his countrymen, and respondent to the will of the nation, which has chosen him as caudillo and redeemer, has determined to end the misfortunes of the towns, carrying before him the pronunciamiento of Veracruz, regardless of the obstacles that are cast in his pathway. Swept by the rhetoric of an anonymous writer, the text elevated Santa Anna above St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Compañía de Jesús, the Society of Jesus, because of his zeal for the welfare of human beings. The pronunciamiento that influenced Santa Anna's decision to oppose Anastasio Bustamante emanated as a pamphlet dated July 5, 1832, from the garrisons of Veracruz and of the Rock Island fortress of San Juan Ulloa. Capping the victory at Tampico, the pronunciamiento of Veracruz included the expulsion. They used the word expulsion rather than the conveyance of those Spaniards who had stayed behind, the wounded from the Battle of Tampico. There were 60 of them. They sent them, instead of to Veracruz, from out of Veracruz to from Veracruz to New Orleans rather than to Havana, Cuba. And they went aboard the commandeered brigantines. You had Aguascalientes, Alto, the Tamesi, and a schooner named the Shark. A provocative footnote for the future Texas campaign in this pamphlet was the cryptic disappearance of Colonel Joaquin Ramirez y Sesma, assigned to the ministerial division of Tamaulipas, who had been implicated in the disreputable assassination of General Vicente Guerrero. A Bustamantista partisan warned the Centralists that they had only two choices: to support the government in power or to thrust the nation into hell. Santa Anna's legions of rabble-rousers, they said, would destroy the country. To restore legitimacy to the 1824 Constitution, Santa Anna proclaimed that Manuel Gómez Pedraza, then residing in Europe, was the duly elected president of Mexico. However, he did not exhort his followers to annihilate Anastasio Bustamante, who, after all, was a brother general. The Bustamantistas taunted Santa Anna. Where is the hero of Sempoala, conqueror of Tampico, first general of the Republic, second Napoleon of the world, the one and only of Mexico, father of the towns, the liberator, the valiant, the wise, the never all-powerful Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna? They wanted to get him out of his hiding place. To answer his critics, Santa Anna, in rapid order, arranged for Gomez Pedraza to return to Mexico and to serve out the remaining 4 months of his expiring presidency. Upon returning to Mexico in December 1832, General Gomez Pedraza distributed a lengthy pamphlet reviewing the circumstances that culminated in his exile in 1828 and the state of affairs that permitted him to return so late in the year. He came back so late that it was impossible to organize a meaningful agenda of government. And during the interregnum, Santa Anna dually posed as a Federalist and ardent champion of the Constitution of 1824. Accordingly, he campaigned for the presidency, together with Dr. Valentin Gomez Farias for vice president. And 6 months after the inauguration, Santa Anna's partisans disseminating a stirring pamphlet condemning the defection of a few faint-hearted soldiers, but extolled the virtues of troops who remained loyal in the defense of Puebla. We marched to render assistance to those brave sons of Puebla, who have been guided by the heroes of perseverance. It cannot be said that we have abandoned them to chance, those valiant men who have inscribed in their hearts death or liberty forever. Soldiers, the cause which we defend is holier than all other causes. It is the national existence of liberty, of civilization. In the cause of arms, why do you repair with your deeds the scandals which others created by forgetting how much they owe to the country, to the honor of the national symbols, and to themselves? Soldiers, the pathway to glory is wide open. Let us march through it until peace is assured to the Republic. When the action is graced with glory, when it is in possession of the benefits, our name will be repeated from mouth to mouth, greeting us saviors of independence, of liberty, and of the Federation. In that transition between 1832 and 1833, Santa Anna finessed the subtleties in performance, adroitness, and skill in utilizing the pamphlets as media, in denouncing critics, and in advancing the goals in public policy that he favored. The abundance of pamphlets in the Mexicana collection at the Sutro Library will require keen eyesight and insight in selecting documents and arranging them in sequence to discern patterns in content and literary style. In many cases, anonymity of authorship is a shield pamphleteers use to conceal their identity. In other cases, the pamphlets are incomplete, leaving the researcher to ponder not only the author or authors of the printed text, but also the content of the missing passages and the historical context in which they were composed. Santa Anna's role as a pamphleteer is replete with questions. Was he the actual author of the pamphlets which his full name and rank appear at the conclusion? Or did he have a press agent on his staff to distribute the materials in a timely manner? One characteristic about the pamphlets became evident in my study. Santa Anna's pronunciamientos were pithy, precise, and brief, suggesting he knew his audience, and he desired for his readers to remember his words and to transmit the message in the oral tradition to loyal partisans unable to read. Santa Anna's critics, on the other hand, produced pamphlets that were marathons in polemical argument. The value of the critics' tirades is that they often contained an historical context that inspired a response. Santa Anna's role as a pamphleteer before the Texas campaign serves as an indicator of how he mastered the medium to cultivate the loyalty of partisans. More importantly, it serves as a prism of lights and shadows in an effort to perceive Santa Anna's oratorical gifts in an arena surrounded by throngs of admirers, both civilians and soldiers. With limited temporal resources and even shorter spans of time to confront crises, how else can his leadership and ability to recruit thousands of troops for campaigns near and far be explained? Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, soldier, president, pamphleteer, country gentleman, and actor, was definitely good theater. Muchas gracias y muy buenas tardes.